joining us today. My name is Vicky Churcher from the IPTF, and I'm delighted to be joined by Keith Richards. Keith is CEO of the Consumer Duty Alliance, and Keith is going to tell us a little bit about the work that Consumer Duty Alliance do and how Consumer Duty is looking 1 year on. If I can start by asking you, Keith, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how the Consumer Duty Alliance came about?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for asking, Vicky. So I've spent 40 years in retail financial services. I started my career in insurance, and I've held a number of senior exec roles throughout that time, including head of retail for Royal London Group, managing director for Tenet Group, CEO of the Personal Finance Society, which also encompassed chief membership officer for the Chartered Insurance Institute. I've pretty much held a regulatory role, a control function role, from the day that regulation came into force back in the mid-80s. So I'm pretty well averse to all of the regulatory change that's shaped effectively and reshaped this sector throughout. The Consumer Duty Alliance is a truly independent, not-for-profit body. Its board are all pro bono, and it has no commercial output. So it's about bringing together retail financial services to work a bit more collaboratively from a sharing of good practice and the development or supporting the implementation of consumer-focused outcomes. The rules to us are a significant change. So we agree with the regulator that this is a seismic change, a huge change of direction for the FCA, away from prescriptive-based rules to ones of outcomes-focused, which actually mean that everyone in an organisation now has a responsibility. So the Consumer Duty Alliance is really about bringing together the whole sector together and also augmenting the great work of many of the established firms that already provide services across the sector.
I hosted a Q&A session with you back in July, and one of the things you've referenced quite a lot is about a tick box exercise. So what reassurance can you offer advisors and people in the insurance industry that consumer duty is not just another thing to do? Why is it important rather than just being a burden or a tick box exercise, as you referenced back in July?
Yeah, well, if we think about it, Vicky, it's the first piece of regulatory reform and terminology that the sector owned before regulation came into effect. In other words, every good firm believes that it focuses on the delivery of the best outcomes for its customers or its clients. So the reason this is so important is it's almost giving back the whole industry the opportunity to influence the future direction of travel. A move away from prescriptive rules often frustrated good firms because they felt that they were being victimized for some bad players in the sector, and the regulator was effectively implementing rules based on the lowest common denominator, which by definition means that good firms that weren't guilty were having to comply with the same sort of rules. So it often felt quite bureaucratic. And I might add, in many ways, we introduced changes to our processes that didn't add any value to the end consumer whatsoever. In fact, I would say that being on various boards, that we often signed off against changes to processes that hindered good consumer outcomes, that probably confused consumers more. So I think now this is giving the power back to the boards and the management teams, and in fact everyone in business, to really focus on, if it doesn't deliver against the consumer duty outcomes expected, then you shouldn't be doing it. In other words, if you're bundling a load of forms out to a consumer that's adding no value, then you should be not doing it. So it's getting our head around what that means. So, adding another 26 pieces of paper onto a suitability report is easy. Taking them off is now where we're going to have the opportunity to look at how we deliver much better outcomes for our customers and how we change our processes and services to support that.
And of course, we could save a few trees in the process, which is always a bonus. We often hear, Keith, people talking about vulnerable customers. What kinds of people would be considered vulnerable? Is it somebody who has an obvious disability challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question, Vicky. And I think, some of the FCA recent research demonstrated that within the wealth management sector, 49% of wealth managers felt that they didn't have any vulnerable customers, but more startlingly, 69% of stockbrokers didn't think they had any vulnerable customers. And I think it's the terminology that we use which stigmatizes the word vulnerable customer with age-related cognitive impairment or an identifiable disability, which of course firms would need to address. Someone with, for example, an eyesight problem, a hearing disability. But what they're also focusing on is people that are in temporary periods of vulnerable circumstance. The interesting change from the FCA, I might add, has moved away from vulnerable customer to vulnerable circumstances. So in other words, we've now got to look at, so if someone came to us, an existing client, for example, or customer with a bereavement in the family or going through divorce, we would recognize those as potential circumstances that need us to give additional care and attention to this customer, given the circumstances that they're facing, and we might offer them additional help and support because of their circumstance. So this shift away from vulnerable customer to the circumstances, the vulnerable circumstances that people face, is quite a significant shift. And I think we've got to think about the role that we perform is often actually helping people mitigate vulnerable circumstances. So sometimes consumers come to us because they're experiencing a life change, which actually can be vulnerable. Someone, for example, inheriting money who's never invested before is now in a vulnerable circumstance because they've got no real experience of the investment market. They've never experienced the volatility of the way markets go up and down. So you would need to take extra care and attention when actually guiding that client on any products or services that you have to offer and any ongoing support that you provide. So vulnerability, I think, is a word that we've just got to use internally. We've got to think about what the FCA really asking us to do is demonstrate that we recognise circumstances that may need additional consideration, help or support.
Okay, that's really interesting because, I mean, IPAW stands for, well, it used to stand for Income Protection Awareness Week. We changed awareness to action. And I think that's a really good action for everybody listening today to think, are we using the right terminology for vulnerable customers? Should we consider even internally changing that? Because if we talk about it internally, sometimes it slips out, when we're talking to customers. So that's really interesting. And finally, Keith, can I ask, what top tips can you share with firms who want to make absolutely sure that they are compliant with the Consumer Duty? How can Consumer Duty Alliance help? What top tips would you give us?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. I mean, the first thing is rest assured that this is an ongoing journey. So your regulator has already stressed that this is not a one and done exercise. This is an ongoing evolutionary process to deliver the right set of outcomes. So as long as the regulator can see that you've been doing your assessment at the early stage, looking at any gaps you've got in your processes and services, then you're probably on the right track. Now, what we've provided through the Alliance is a free self-assessment tool. It's very easy to go through. It will provide you with a dashboard of all the key areas that the regulator expects you to have addressed in your Consumer Duty requirements. It also helps you link straight away to certain aspects of the rules, so direct into the FCA's website, and also some resources that we've provided as good practice to help people benchmark. So things like the new board reporting, we've got a full guide on to help firms because there's a new deadline coming up on the first anniversary that includes the need for an annual strategy or board report. Or for small firms, we might call it a business plan that incorporates all the aspects of Consumer Duty outcomes. So free tool is the first stage of, go onto our website, pick up the free tool. It's www.consumerduty.org. But in addition, don't try to mark your own homework. So whether you're large or small, do bring in some external expertise. There's lots of great compliance support services and consultants in the market who can offer you a much, much quicker assessment and give you the confidence of where you're on track and where perhaps there's gaps that you need to address. FCA don't mind there being gaps, by the way. So I think the really important thing is none of us profess to be perfect. So where you've got gaps, just identify them and then put a plan in place of how you're going to take remedial action to address that gap. That's what the regulator is going to be expecting.
Okay, thanks, Keith. That was really great, really interesting. And for all our viewers watching today, IPTF is actually an affiliate of the Consumer Duty Alliance, and highly recommend that you do look at them. And Keith, can you just remind us of that email address again, please?
Certainly.
Of your website address, sorry.
Of course. It's www.consumerduty.org.
Perfect. Great. A great action there for everybody. Nice way to end. Thank you very much for joining us, Keith. It's been fantastic. I've learned lots. I hope everybody else has too. Thank you.